you heard that Rosalía included a quote from the philosopher Simone Weil in her new album, and you have no idea who Weil is, or what does it mean that love is not consolation, it is light? Well, don't worry, I'm here to help you out. In this video, I will tell you who Simone Weil is, in which of her books we find the quote chosen by Rosalía, and what does it mean, so you can pick up clues to interpret the songs on her new album. I'm Enric, welcome back to Addicted to Philosophy, let's begin. Great, so who is Simone Weil? Simone Weil was born the 3rd of February 1909 in Paris into a bourgeois Jewish family with both parents working as doctors. Her older brother, André, was a mathematical genius, something that always tormented Simone. She compared herself to him constantly, feeling she could never match his talent, even though she too had extraordinary intelligence. But if something truly set her apart, it was her innate and astonishing ability to feel the suffering of others. At just 11 years old, for instance, she refused to eat sugar because soldiers fighting at the front in World War I didn't have any. And throughout her life, she did everything she could to make other people's suffering her own. She was convinced that a purely abstract, disembodied intelligence, one that floated around in the realm of ideas without ever experiencing real human suffering, could never access the truth she sought, a truth that, far from those lofty heights, was heard instead in the cries of the oppressed. As we'll see, this radical compassion for human suffering stayed with her throughout her life and shaped her thought profoundly. At 19, she entered the École Normale Supérieure in Paris with the highest score and as the only woman in her class. There, she had a clash with a young Simone de Beauvoir. One day, after running into each other and discussing the problems of the world, Simone Weil claimed what was needed was a revolution that would fit everyone. Beauvoir objected, saying that was fine, but the real problem wasn't making people happy, it was finding meaning in their existence. Simone Weil looked her straight in the eyes and replied, "That just shows you've never been hungry." They never spoke again, although Beauvoir always respected her, especially for her ability to empathize with others' suffering and burst into tears just by hearing about it. In fact, Weil's relentless defense of the rights of the oppressed eventually earned her the nickname the Red Virgin. In 1931, she obtained a philosophy professorship and became involved in the labor movement, sharing her salary with the unemployed and teaching classes to miners in a nearby town. Developing her political consciousness at breakneck speed, in 1933 she begged her mother to take in the revolutionary Trotsky at home, and when they did, she supposedly spent days arguing with him at the top of her lungs about the methods of revolution. Her desire to experience the oppression of others firsthand pushed her to the limit. For example, working in the fields harvesting potatoes for 10 hours a day, or taking a job as a factory worker at Renault under the terrible conditions of the time. Weil simply couldn't understand the modern separation between the contemplative life of the philosopher and the active life of ordinary people. For her, if a philosopher wanted to speak legitimately about social justice, they couldn't do it from the comfort of a sofa or an office. They had to do it as one more of those who suffer. In 1936, she traveled to Spain to join the anarchist side during the Civil War, but being clumsy, she had an accident with boiling oil that burned her leg, forcing her to return to France to recover. Even so, the experience of war marked her deeply, and she wrote this: "My theory is that once the temporal and spiritual authorities have decided that certain people's lives have no value, nothing is more natural to man than killing. As soon as men know they can kill without fear of reprisals, they begin to kill, or at least they encourage the killers with approving smiles." It was during this period that she began to open herself to religious experience in a way she herself described as mystical. Here we can start to sense some connections between Weil's thought and Rosalía's album, which is also being presented with clear religious overtones, or at least a distinctly religious imagery. Weil had been born into an agnostic family and raised that way, but as she recounts in her intellectual autobiography, Waiting for God, during a trip to Portugal in 1935, she witnessed a pilgrimage for the first time, and suddenly understood that Christianity was, in her own words, the religion of slaves, and that being a slave herself, she had no choice but to abandon her parents' agnosticism and join the faith. Later, in 1937, she traveled to Assisi, Italy, and there, in the chapel of Santa Maria degli Angeli, where Saint Francis of Assisi himself had prayed, Weil suddenly felt an overwhelming inner force that compelled her to kneel and begin to pray. Finally, in 1938, while deep in prayer at the Abbey of Solesmes, she felt as though Christ himself descended from heaven, appeared before her, and took her as his own. Everyone can think of this whatever they like, but that's how she tells it. At the end of the video, I will say more about Weil's relationship with Christianity, which was rather strange and convoluted, because I think it gives us an interesting clue as to why Rosalía would choose her for her album. In any case, in 1943, Weil fell ill with tuberculosis, a disease she probably would have survived if it hadn't been for her refusal to eat properly, since she wanted to share the living conditions of prisoners in Nazi Germany. Because of this, her illness worsened and she tragically died the same August at the age of 34. And so she died as she had lived, in intimate union with human suffering. But what does the quote in the album actually mean? Love is not consolation, it is light. Well, give the video a big like if you are enjoying it, and I will explain it. This sentence belongs to her work Gravity and Grace, a posthumous collection of reflections she wrote in her notebooks around 1941-42. The book begins by describing how two forces rule the entire universe: light and gravity. Gravity, according to Weil, is the universal law of nature, the force that weighs things down and pulls everything downward, dragging the entire cosmos towards misfortune and misery with the inevitability of Greek fate. Light, on the other hand, and this matters a lot because Rosalía's album is titled LUX, light in Latin, symbolizes for Weil the eruption of the supernatural world, the arrival of grace into a nature that, left to itself, tends towards disaster. This light, which often appears unexpectedly as a gift or a surprise, is the light that lifts up everything that has fallen. Whatever gravity pushes downward, light raises to a new state of fullness. With this description of these two forces, light and gravity, what human beings long for is the arrival of light into their disastrous life. But Weil believes it's not possible to force the appearance of light, though we can make ourselves ready for it, by accepting emptiness, another concept she uses in this work. Grace fills empty spaces, but it can only enter where there is a void to receive it, and it is grace itself which makes this void. For Weil, emptiness itself is also an unnatural state, because all natural things, including ourselves, tend to occupy and dominate as much space as our power allows. That's why, for nature, for what is natural, the immediate reaction when a void appears is to try to fill it in any way possible. For example, when I give something to someone, when I do someone a favor, I deprive myself of something and therefore create a void within me. The way nature fills this void is by demanding that the other person give something back in return. Nature, Weil says, cannot bear emptiness on its own. It seeks to fill it by exerting its power. Enduring emptiness, then, is renouncing to use all the power one has. And that goes against the laws of nature. It goes beyond nature's capacity, which is why grace must once again be the one to generate this emptiness. But if one lets grace push them against their natural tendencies, and, for example, instead of seeking payback for something good they've done, allows that void to form, then a suction of air is produced and a supernatural reward results. Light can enter that dark and wrenching night of emptiness. But this void, Weil writes, is fuller than all fullnesses. If we get as far as this, we shall come through all right, for God fills the void. We are getting to the idea that love is not consolation but light. Light that fills this void created within us. But first, we must understand that for Weil, if we seek to be filled with light, we must first empty ourselves of the world, to take the form of a slave, to reduce ourselves to the point we occupy in space and time. That is to say, to nothing. Paradoxically, one must give up expecting anything in order to be ready to receive everything. Empty desire, finality of all content, to desire in the void, to desire without any wishes, to detach our desire from all good things, and to wait. Experience proves that this waiting is satisfied. It is then we touch the absolute good. But to accomplish this, Weil continues, one must achieve what she calls total detachment. Unconsoled affliction is necessary. And here, at last, comes the second key key idea in Rosalia's quote: there must be no consolation. Why? Because if we fill the void with some form of consolation, then the light can no longer enter. Grace cannot enter because it only enters when the void is complete. The supernatural reward does not come if we receive other wages, that is, another reward. It is the vacuum which makes it appear. What this means is that in the inner emptying, we must reject all those consolations that rush in to fill the void before the light can enter, the light that elevates us beyond our natural condition. We must leave on one side the beliefs which fill up voids and sweeten what is bitter. The belief in immortality, for example, Weil says. That is a consolation that fills the heart in the face of the void of death, and therefore prevents God, grace, light from breaking in. Our natural tendency is to fill the void quickly with some kind of consolation. But we must not try to sweeten the bitterness, Weil says. We must persist in it as long as possible, because it is in that persistence of bitterness, in that absolute emptying, that we become ready, we prepare ourselves for the light to finally enter. Not even, Weil says, should we fall for the common religious consolation that God has a plan for everything and that evils fit within a divine plan. That, again, is just another consolation meant to sweeten the bitterness of the void. We must do the exact opposite, to love God through and across the destruction of Troy and Carthage, and with no consolation. Love is not consolation, it is light. And so we arrive at the quote in the album, love is not consolation, it is light. And with the context I've explained, we can now sense its poetic meaning. The love Weil speaks of does not seek to feel emptiness, to feel absence, nor to soften suffering the way consolations do. And that is why love is not a consolation, because consolations, by softening and hiding reality, darken it, covering it under a lie. Love, genuine love, the kind that truly expects nothing in return, is more like light, the illumination in which we can see reality as it is, and the void in all its raw detail, waiting for something other to come and fill it. Or at least that's how I interpret it. I'm no Simone Weil specialist either. As I hope you'll agree, Rosalía couldn't have chosen a more poetic philosopher to introduce her album, nor one that fits better with the flirtation with religiosity her record seems to be playing with. Because here comes a crucial interpretive point. Despite her conversion to Christianity, for a long time, at least until her death, according to some testimonies, there's some controversy here, Simone Weil stubbornly refused to be baptized, much to the despair of Father Perrin, her spiritual director. And this is because, on one hand, Weil seemed to detest the very idea of dogma, and on the other, she felt that God was calling her to live a faith in spiritual exile, without even having a home or refuge like the church to belong to, in order to unite herself even more with the condition of the oppressed and forgotten, and to be a bridge to the non-believer. And this ambiguity in Simone Weil's relationship with religion has sparked widely different reactions, from those who have called for her canonization as a martyr of charity, to those who have branded her thought as deeply heretical. And without pretending to know what's in Rosalia's mind, it wouldn't surprise me if she chose Weil partly for this reason, and that in the coming months we'll see her album spark similar reactions, from those who will want to see in her a kind of new Apostle Paul of religion, to those who will demand her head for improper and heterodox appropriation, when in reality the most likely thing is that we find in the album something similar to what we see in Simone Weil's thought, a free spirit who, deeply drawn to the beauty of religious experience and its power to respond to human suffering, wants to explore it in her own way, in her own style, as honestly as possible with herself. And now, if you want to keep learning philosophy, you can't miss this video here, where I tell you about 10 deadly traps that can sabotage your path toward critical thinking. They are super common mistakes I have made and still make 1,000 times, but I think knowing them can help you on your own philosophical journey. So go on, give it a good click, I'll see you there, and above all, don't forget to think.